So on some of the decorative stitches that are built into the Pfaff sewing machines, you can actually change the density. Now, what does that mean? It is different than changing the stitch length. Let's start by picking stitch number 150. You'll notice it's kind of that, I'll call it a watermelon seed. It's set up for a full 9 millimeters wide, which is, we'll just leave it at that. If we were to make the stitch length longer, notice that the decorative stitch also gets longer. So that's a 26 millimeter repeat. That's a pretty big decorative stitch. If you were to go the opposite direction and bring it closer together, all it does is it shrinks the decorative stitch to be a shorter version of itself. So now it's more like a beach ball instead of a watermelon seed. So I'm going to put it back to normal. So sometimes when I stitch with a thinner thread, when I stitch this, I can kind of see the fabric through it. And instead of just shortening the stitch length and trying to squish it together, I can keep the same length of that stitch by touching the Alt button. And now this is density. So I can actually make it, and you'll see it's actually going to get really thick on screen. So see how it became solid? Now that's probably too close together. My stitches probably will pile up unless I have a really, really thin thread. But it is showing us that the stitch itself has not changed in length, but the amount of stitches it will take to get from the first stitch to the last stitch, there's going to be more stitches. Also vice versa, if I have a much thicker thread, sometimes when you start to sew, it piles up, doesn't let the decorative stitch keep going because it's too thick. You could also change the density to be less dense and increase it, but again, you still have the same original length of that decorative stitch.